I stood before you, dear brother, watching in horror as your lips parted for that poisoned chalice. I followed a path once trod by those who would become sisters and brothers, watching the past and present converge. You did not know I was there. I looked on from another place, waiting to be born.
Hello, I'm Sean of the Lore Hunter, and in this video I'm talking about Solomon the Scholar from Mortal Shell. In my preview video about Mortal Shell, I predicted that the shells were not just the corpses of some Fulgrim randos, but important characters in the world of Mortal Shell. Nowhere does this prediction ring truer than with Solomon the Scholar. His birth is described by developer Cold Symmetry as a turning point in the world's history. He is the brother of the old prisoner, and he was likely killed by fellow Shell, Harros the Vassal. Solomon's connections and importance in the world make his story a fun one to explore, and that through his story we can also understand better the story and world of Mortal Shell. And along the way, we will figure out why his brother became a giant bird. Let's get into it. The best summarization of Solomon's story in the game can be found in an etching beside his corpse, or shell, where the foundling finds him in a cave in Fulgrim. And what of my kin? Are you reading this, dear brother? Do you still remember how we played at Scholarship? Simpler times, when our quandaries were mere dramatics, dressed up as theory. These words, written by a dying Solomon, reflect on his brother and his scholarship, the cruxes of his story. In a world with tar-addled cultists worshipping the revered as gods, Solomon is the contrarian with the catchphrase, "There is no God because there are no gods." In Solomon's recollections of knowledge and of strength, Solomon makes it clear that he and his brother did not drink the Kool-Aid of the Deathless Cult. Well, I guess they literally kind of drank the Kool-Aid, but not figuratively. But anyways, in Recollection of Strength, Solomon says,
"Vision is a burden, my dear brother. I do not blame you for leaving this empire of sycophants and charlatans behind. I fear our knowledge is only a privilege afforded by our silence. Each discovery only provides our masters with more chains."
And in Recollection of Knowledge, he adds,
"It would be laughable if it were not so lamentable. These so-called seers wield icons and contraptions that they do not understand. They uphold laws they ignore as needed."
Solomon and his brother saw hypocrisy in the religion of the revered, with those in power abusing their power for self-gain. At the center of this power imbalance is the nectar that is harvested from the sacred glands of the revered. In an IGN interview, developer Cold Symmetry stated that sacred nectar is the root of all conflict in the world. The remnant of tar item describes nectar as a fraction of the revered's transcendent nature made manifest. And the slurry of tar item states that drinking purified nectar brings on harmonious transformation. Each sip brings the devout into a more amicable union with the revered. However, true nectar is hard to come by, and most devout only get tar, a byproduct of the purification process. It's pretty easy to see how those wielding a scarce, highly sought after, and addictive substance could abuse their position. So, if you were someone like Solomon who despised the hierarchy of the Deathless Cult, you might aim to find a way around all of it. When the player speaks to the old prisoner, Solomon's brother, while inhabiting Solomon, the old prisoner has a number of interesting things to say about Solomon, including this.
"He promised to turn tar into true nectar, and he succeeded."
Solomon created the most highly sought-after substance in Fulgrim, the root of all conflict in the world, out of the byproduct of the nectar purification process. It seems like this creation would have massive ramifications for the world, that Solomon could become the Robin Hood of true nectar, but this is the only mention of it. I think this is the case for two reasons. One is that Solomon probably did not make this discovery public knowledge. As stated earlier, his knowledge was only a privilege afforded by his silence. The other reason is that this creation led to some juicy drama. Let's recap what we heard from the old prisoner earlier and continue his dialogue.
He promised to turn tar into true nectar, and he succeeded. I witnessed the world birthed from the fires of heaven. I watched as it decayed into this wretched place. Such a gift. But when the vision ended, he stared at me with revulsion.
Solomon made true nectar from tar, and his brother drank it. He saw a vision of the world from its birth through its downfall, and I think this is the first time he saw his defeat at the hand of the foundling. And upon the vision ending, he saw Solomon looking at him with revulsion. In the archives after obtaining the knotted gland, Sister Ganessa tells the foundling,
I remember a heretic who drank deeply. He took what wasn't his and gulped it down greedily. He was unrecognizable afterward, another man entirely. This was his reward and his penance.
From these two accounts, we can surmise that Solomon created true nectar. His brother drank it greedily, saw a vision, and transformed into the Lovecraftian big bird we know as the Old Prisoner. Before continuing with Solomon's story, I want to take us on a small digression about what the Old Prisoner saw in his vision and his motivation moving forward. I mentioned that the Old Prisoner saw his defeat against the foundling. When you beat the Old Prisoner, he states,
I glimpsed this moment over and over. Am I now to witness your ascension? Or will you shepherd me across the threshold? I see nothing now. Nothing at all.
The Old Prisoner held the fallacy that he could ascend. As the glimpse of fallacy states, a newborn's wings flutter as ancient roots stretch deep below the earth. The sky stretches out, a vast pool of light and color, daring the beholder to drink deeply, endlessly. The Old Prisoner saw his fate and refuted it. He thought that by drinking enough true nectar he could ascend, despite that very nectar giving him glimpses of his fate again and again. And the thing that scared him most was the unknowable ending, the ancient roots pulling him down to where he could not see and there was silence. This refusal to accept fate is contrasted by Solomon's story, who, as we will see, was very aware of his fate, but had the resolve to see it through. For this next part of Solomon's story, I want to make it clear that the sequence of events are difficult, if not impossible to parse, and that I think that this is by design. The primary means by which we understand Solomon's story come from Solomon himself as we deepen our connection with his shell. The Old Prisoner says of Solomon that,
He always had too much to say, babbling on and on, incessantly. His words wound into such impossible, staggering formations, often contradicting himself, beautifully. I do miss him.
So while I can speak with relative confidence about the events in Solomon's life, it is not a straightforward story. I will present the sequence as I best understood it, but just know that it is not very linear, and as we will see with Solomon, time itself is not linear. During his time in the shifting archives, Solomon tells us in the Rocollection of Knowledge that he found a tablet like nothing I'd seen before. In the Accretion of Foresight and Inheritance, he tells us even more.
It's gibberish. Familiar signs and symbols etched by a human hand in my own tongue. Yet they're arranged without any discernible logic. The letters spiral in concentric circles, interspersed with figures that resemble mathematical formulae. It means nothing, I'm certain. But I can't look away. How could this be a story of a man with my name? He bears the same scars, shares in the same desires, even finds the same tablet. Can it be called history if it's written by a being that sees the future as readily as the past?
Solomon finds a tablet that writes out his story, past, present, and future. Talk about a spoiler alert. And I think, in part because he has seen the ruinous consequences of not accepting fate through his brother, he accepts the tablet before him. He accepts that his story is already written. When you learn Solomon's name when you first get his shell, he says,
Existence is a curious matter. The greatest triumph in the universe, gifted and squandered. I shan't make the same mistakes as my brother. When the moment comes, I'll exercise restraint.
Solomon and the old prisoner both see their role in the world, with Solomon accepting his existence and seeing his purpose, and his brother squandering it by not showing restraint and trying to fight fate. And Solomon's fate is not an easy one. In an etching from the beta titled Solomon's Etching, Solomon writes, "He appeared again in my dreams, this father. He revealed a bastion fashioned by stone with many hands, erected for the seedlings. In time, their burgeoning forms will outgrow its damp sanctuary. His followers flock all around us, but he withdraws. The workbench is his altar, where he prepares the vestments of their faith. Am I blessed or damned to be chosen for this purpose?" There's a lot happening here, but understanding this etching will help us understand the next portion of Solomon's story. The father in this instance is Hadern. You know, that guy who makes you fight him every time you want a new weapon. A portion of an etching from the beta titled Solomon's Plan says, "Without Hadern, the tower is lonesome. His progeny have vanished." I make this distinction because the old prisoner is sometimes called the Dark Father, but the two etchings from the beta written by Solomon speak of Hadern as a progenitor, aka father, and the rest of the etching aligns with what we understand about Hadern. And what do we know about Hadern? I'm going to take a quick moment to explain the enigmatic Hadern, as he is a key character in this part of Solomon's story. We meet Hadern in a damp sanctuary at the beginning of the game, before awaking in the mortal realm. We see glimpses of him in the insight visions, and we fight him for weapons in the same watery sanctuary we begin the game in, which is also where we fight the Unchained at the end. This sparse, foggy realm is the Void, a space between the mortal realm and what lies beyond. There is no specific item or dialogue that states this, but everything moving forward reinforces this idea, so just bear with me for now. The Foundling interacts exclusively with Hadern in the Void. In the official OST, there are evocative lore statements. One of them says, "The passenger says there is no light at the end of the tunnel, only eternal silence. Thus he returned to the void between worlds to warn those hungry for honor and tell those who don't heed it, I told you so." Hadern is the passenger, and he remains in the void to warn those who would attempt to ascend and what lies beyond. To learn more about Hadern and how he fits into Solomon's story, let's continue with Solomon's etching. Hadern shows Solomon a bastion formed with stone by many hands erected for the seedlings. In time, their burgeoning forms will outgrow its damp sanctuary. Hadern is showing Solomon where the unborn, including the Foundling, come from. The remainder of the etching reads, "His followers flock all around us, but he withdraws. The workbench is his altar, where he prepares the vestments of their faith. Am I blessed or damned to be chosen for this purpose?" From this, we can surmise that Hadern is a smith. The workbench is his altar. This makes sense, as Hadern's primary function in the game is to provide the Foundling with new weapons. The workbenches we find in the game are also found right next to the book, referred to in the press kit as Hadern's Book, that we use to travel to the Void and duke it out with Hadern for our new weapon. The final line of Solomon's etching reads, "Am I blessed or damned to be chosen for this purpose?" What was it that Hadern chose Solomon to do? We know that Solomon is fated to be a shell for the Foundling, and Hadern showed Solomon the unborn. We can't be sure Solomon already read his fate when Hadern appeared to him, but I'm inclined to think he did. However, I think the purpose for which Hadern chose Solomon was to imprison his brother. Solomon's other etching from the beta, Solomon's Plan, states, "Without Hadern, the tower is a lonesome, empty monument. My handiwork crumbles as the wilds encroach. His progeny have vanished, followers dispersed. But perhaps it is not without purpose? It can be born anew. If there is a place where my dear brother can finally rest, it's here. Abandoned in this empty wilderness, I only need to lure him from that maddening library." Hadern chose Solomon to imprison his brother, giving him his tower as a place to work and knowledge of the tool he would need to get the job done, the Seal of Infinity. Tarnished by the time the foundling gets a hold of it, the description states, both symbol and weapon, the seal is rusted and filthy, a symbol of infinity. The Forbidden Offering upgrade item for the Tarnished seal states, the rite of transfiguration remains forbidden, but its practice is not completely forgotten. The promise of revelation carried a high price for those who glimpsed the unknowable. Such followers became forsaken creatures, fit only to be walked away. Hadrian was familiar with the use of the Seal of Infinity and the Rite of Transfiguration. Hadrian, having glimpsed what lies beyond, tries to spare those who would seek the unknowable. The Rite of Transfiguration tells us that those who glimpsed the unknowable became forsaken creatures. The only etching to mention Hadrian in the full release states, these creatures, twisted and malformed, they're almost unrecognizable. Whatever gifts Hadrian has lavished them with were wasted. They've strayed so far from the path, they're lost in a wilderness of their own making. These creatures are the Noxurpers, the vampire dudes who attack us in the fog. They drank too deeply, glimpsed the unknowable end, and became twisted creatures, and I believe that Hadrian used the Seal of Infinity to perform the Rite of Transfiguration on them, to lock them away and put them to rest. Given this history and experience, it would make sense that Hadrian tasked Solomon with performing the Rite of Transfiguration on his brother, a similarly twisted creature who has glimpsed the darkness and silence of the unknowable. And so Solomon does this. Solomon lures his brother to Hadrian's tower, perhaps with the promise of true nectar, and performs the Rite of Transfiguration on him, imprisoning him in the tower. Now you might be asking at this point, how do you lure someone who has glimpsed their fate? Why wouldn't the old prisoner just not go? And to that I say, I don't freaking know. Perhaps he did not see this part of his story. Or more likely, he saw this in his visions, but in his thirst for true nectar he went anyway. The old prisoner, like many villains, are overconfident in their abilities. I mean, he sees the foundling murk him again and again, but he gives the Tarnished Seal cool powers anyways. Remember, the old prisoner's fault is that he does not accept fate, and entertains the fallacy that he can overcome his fate and ascend. So now that we've gotten through all of that, let's talk about the part of Solomon's story that was the hardest for me to parse, the birth of Solomon. As I mentioned at the start of the video, the Birth of Solomon launch trailer currently playing is summarized by developer Cold Symmetry as, viewers are taken to witness a cataclysmic event at the Seat of Infinity before seeing the shell known as Solomon rise. Adding on to this, they stated, Solomon's birth is a turning point in the world's history, and so it seemed fitting to announce the release of the game with a short depiction of this event. Now I don't know about you, but when I was born I was not a full-size man dressed in armor. The birth of Solomon, as depicted in this trailer, is a second, unnatural birth, and a turning point in the world's history. So how exactly was Solomon reborn? An inscription in the Seat of Infinity states, the reward for loyalty is servitude, thus the twice-born requires no pledges. They came here searching for answers, like you do now, but you will find nothing but silence and fury. Throw yourself into the chasm. Let the void take you and remake you. You will be reborn, a child of the myriad, a sister or brother. This inscription outlines the journey of those who would become sisters or brothers. They make their way in search of answers to the shifting archive, find madness or the silence of the unknowable, and they cast themselves into the void, the world between worlds where they are reborn as a child of the myriad. The guardian of the gland for the Seat of Infinity is Crucix the Twiceborn. While the Twiceborn could be referring to the conjoined twin situation going on there, I think Crucix was also cast into the void, but instead of joining the myriad of sisters and brothers, he was reborn as the creature we see in the shifting archives. Solomon took a similar path. In Solomon's accretion of yearning, he states,
You warned me not to go, as if you knew what I would find among the multitudes. But if that were true, why bother with such a useless gesture? Is it our nature to bemoan the unchanging course of fate?
I see this as Solomon's brother urging him not to walk the path of the myriad, which are also referred to as a multitude. I'm not sure when this occurs, but I personally think this occurs right after Solomon imprisons his brother. Regardless of when this occurs, the old prisoner fears for his brother, casting himself into the void, where the unknowable waits. But Solomon is resolute. He responds through the accretion of dominance, saying,
Fate is not ours to defy, only to fulfill. You're chosen, as am I, brother. As is the unborn, ordained by the infinite. Perhaps you'll understand one day. In death, I shall find a new purpose. And your purpose, twisted and malevolent as you are, will light the way.
Solomon knows his fate, and he is determined to see it through. Solomon goes to the shifting archives and throws himself into the chasm. The accretion of resolve tells us what happens when he does this.
I stood before you, dear brother, watching in horror as your lips parted for that poisoned chalice. I followed a path once trod by those who would become sisters and brothers, watching the past and present converge. You did not know I was there. I looked on from another place, waiting to be born.
Solomon cast himself into the void, following the path tread by those who would become sisters and brothers. In the void, the past and present converge, and he watches the tragic event unfold again. The birth of Solomon continues in the accretion of endurance.
Though you hide behind that mask, I know you far better than I ever knew him. You've shown me a second path. Do you hear that? Hope is a funny thing you've kindled in me. A little yarn we spin, but perhaps it may yet come true.
Solomon has come into contact with the Myriad, specifically Sister Ganessa. This is a difficult bit of dialogue to parse with certainty, but I think that this experience of being in the void and following the path of the Myriad is an experience of kinship for Solomon, as he meets those who have accepted their fate. As for this second path, I believe Solomon is talking about his path, his birth, and its purpose. The yarn that they spin, an idiom meaning to tell a fictional story, is the false truth that the revered are gods and that it is possible to ascend. However, the truth may be that while the revered are not gods, ascension may be possible for the last seedling, the foundling. This is hardcore material for another video, but Hadron and Ganessa are key players in the story of the foundling achieving ascension, and Solomon is a part of them, and has an important role to play. And with that, Solomon is reborn. I personally believe that the birth of Solomon happened after he imprisoned his brother, but I think you could argue a version of Solomon's story where his rebirth occurs before he imprisons his brother. But this just feels like some climactic shit to me. Solomon is in the void, reflecting on his life, chatting with Ganessa about the foundling. So I'm going to present something a bit more outlandish, but I think feels more fitting with Solomon's story. An inscription of the Myriad states, "Your eyes refuse to acknowledge our boundless form, but neither time or shape can confine us." The void is the world between worlds. Space and time are meaningless. With that in mind, imagine that Solomon has imprisoned his brother, cast himself into the void, and is reborn into the future, in time for his death. Solomon tells us in his recollection of death,
I know you are awaiting, my assailant. I have read how you will descend upon me. I will be too slow to stop you, though I will try. Just know that I do not blame you. I cannot hold on to this body when another will need it far more. We are a single existence, split only by the tides of time, joined together in death.
Solomon is reborn so that he may die at the hand of his assailant, so that his shell can be used by the foundling, and so that he can set his assailant on a course to meet his own fate. Harros the Vassal, another shell, states in his accretion of endurance,
The brigands fell upon us with crude knives. Trailing blood, I stumbled into a cavern. Deep within, a priest welcomed me, clutching a tablet. He promised I would be reborn within the shadow of the revered. But he could do nothing for my injuries.
His story continues in the accretion of ascent.
He ushered me deeper into the labyrinth. It must have been dug by 1,000 hands. I ignored much of what he said until he called my name. Smiling, he forgave me for the crime I would soon commit. It was all etched in stone, he assured me. These were the ravings of a madman.
And this portion of Harros' story ends with the accretion of foresight.
The madman, I would come to realize, was not burdened with delusions, but truth. Yet the wary ear corrupts honest words into lies. I took him for a spy and cut him down. How else could he know so much about me? He had condemned himself with each utterance.
It's all there. The tablet, the foresight, the chattiness. Solomon was slain by Harros. This placed Solomon where he was fated to be for the Foundling, and this event shook Harros, sending him on his fated way towards becoming another shell for the Foundling. Addressing his assailant, Solomon says, "We are a single existence, split only by the tides of time, joined together in death." Solomon and Harros, although from different times, are joined together in death as shells for the Foundling. And with that, we have come to the end of Solomon's wild ride. He created true nectar from tar, inadvertently turned his brother into a giant bird, imprisoned him, got reborn, and then went and got himself killed so the Foundling could wear him around. If that's not fulfilling, I don't know what is. I of course had to connect the dots at points, unscramble the sequence of events, and speculate a bit, but regardless of the details, the takeaway is the same. Solomon was resolute. He knew his fate, as grim as it could be, and he played his part without wavering. In this sense, he is the opposite of his brother the Old Prisoner, who believed that he could fight against fate. What are your own thoughts on Solomon's story? Solomon is an incredibly pivotal and opaque character in the world of Mortal Shell, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give the video a like, maybe share it with some friends, and consider subscribing to the channel. I hope to do more Mortal Shell lore videos. Let me know what you'd be interested in seeing covered. I also cover lore and development for other games, so take a look at what else I have. Most of all, enjoy your day. Thanks for watching.